Town made the fat orphan girl marry mountain man to pay her dead parents' debt. He burned the contract, marry the mountain killer or work till you die, Cyrus Blackwell announced, waving a contract like a whip. The council nodded, the pews creaked, and the whole town watched Rosie Turner, round-cheeked, 19, still in black for her parents, stand alone beneath the courthouse lamp. She didn't argue. Grief had sanded her voice down to a whisper. Poverty had taken the rest. "Debt is debt," someone muttered. "She'll eat better up there anyway," another snickered. Cyrus smirked and thumped the paper. "Tobias Kane will sign. Redemption Creek will be rid of its charity case by sundown." A shutter slammed in the wind. Somewhere, a church bell counted 5 slow notes. Rosie stared at the inked lines that traded her name for money she never borrowed. Her palms were damp, her stomach hollow. Tobias Kane. The bounty hunter people swore could track a ghost through snowfall. The man with the scar under his left eye and hands that once hauled living men to the noose. "He lives like a wolf," they said. "He'll break her," they said. Cyrus shoved the quill at her. "Make your mark, girl." She swallowed. "Does he know?" "He'll know enough." Laughter rolled like loose gravel. 2 riders flanked her by the elbows and marched her into the street, past windows that refused to open and faces that refused to meet her gaze. Beside the livery, a wagon waited with her mother's old trunk, emptied, but kept for the look of decency. They hoisted her aboard like freight and snapped the reins for the northern trail. Ponderosa shadows crawled over the ruts. Snow melt hissed in the culverts. Halfway up the grade, the mountains rose like a verdict. Rosie wrapped her arms around herself and chose, for the first time since the accident, to keep breathing. If there was any mercy left in this world, it would not come from ink. The road to Tobias Kane's land was a scar carved through endless pines, slick with melting snow and silence. Rosie's thin shawl did little against the wind, but she held it tight anyway, as though it could protect her from what waited ahead. When the wagon crested the last ridge, she saw it, a cabin built from dark timber, standing alone against the slope. Smoke rose from the chimney, steady and thin. The men with her, Cyrus Blackwell and 2 ranch hands, looked uneasy as they pulled to a stop. Cyrus cupped his hands to his mouth. "Kane, come collect what's yours." The door opened. Tobias Kane filled the doorway like a wall. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his clothes worn and marked with dust and blood from the hunt. His hair fell to his shoulders. A faint scar dragged across his cheek. He didn't speak at first, just stared at the strangers as if measuring their weight in sin. Cyrus grinned, waving the papers. "You're a lucky man. I'm here to settle both our debts. The girl's name is Rosie Turner, daughter of the Turners who died last fall. Their debt matches yours. You marry her, and we're even." Rosie's breath caught. Marry. The word didn't sound human anymore. It sounded like a verdict. Tobias's eyes shifted to her. He took in the trembling girl in the oversized dress, cheeks flushed from cold, eyes red from crying. His voice, when it came, was low and steady. "She agreed to this?" Cyrus laughed. "What choice does she have? The dead don't pay bills. You'll find she's strong enough for chores, though she eats plenty." Rosie flinched as the men chuckled. Tobias's jaw flexed. He took the contract from Cyrus, glanced at the bold black ink. "I'll speak with her alone." Cyrus hesitated, but one look at Tobias's eyes made him step back. 5 minutes, he spat. Inside, the cabin smelled of pine smoke and gun oil. Rosie stood in the corner, hands twisting in her skirt. Tobias set the contract on the table. "Do you want this?" Her head jerked up. "What?" "This marriage. This deal." "No," she whispered. "But if I don't, Cyrus will make me his servant. He said I'll work till I die." Tobias studied her in silence. "You're not a debt to be traded." Outside, Cyrus cleared his throat impatiently. "Well, Cain?" Tobias opened the door, stepped into the cold, and held the contract out. "I don't take wives on credit." Cyrus frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" Tobias's answer came in one motion. He tossed the contract into the fireplace beside the door. The flames caught instantly, curling the edges into black smoke. "You fool!" Cyrus lunged, but Tobias's hand closed around his collar like iron. "You don't sell women in my house," he said quietly. "You want your money? I'll pay it. But the girl stays free." The men backed away, faces pale. Cyrus spat in the dirt but didn't argue. "You'll regret this, Cain." Tobias didn't blink. "Get off my mountain." When the wagon wheels disappeared down the trail, the only sound left was the crackling fire. Rosie stood motionless, staring at the ashes on the hearth. Tobias turned to her, his voice softer now. "You can stay here tonight. Tomorrow, I'll take you wherever you want to go." She swallowed, her throat raw. "I don't have anywhere to go." "Then you'll stay," he said simply, "for as long as you need." The mountain wind sighed through the trees outside. For the first time in months, Rosie breathed without fear. Dawn broke pale and cold over Redemption Ridge, the kind of morning where even the light moves slowly through the mist. Rosie woke to the sound of an axe striking wood outside, steady, unhurried blows. She sat up on the small cot Tobias had given her, still half expecting to find herself back in town, back in Cyrus's shadow. But no, the cabin walls smelled of pine resin and smoke, not rot and debt. She stepped outside, wrapping her shawl around her shoulders. Tobias stood by a pile of freshly split logs, sleeves rolled up, steam rising from his breath. He glanced at her once, then back at his work. "There's coffee on the stove," he said. Rosie hesitated. "I can help." He shook his head. "You're a guest, not a worker." Guest. The word felt strange, almost impossible. In town she had been a burden, a nuisance, a debt. Here she was simply a person. Still, she couldn't sit idle. She made breakfast, biscuits from the last of the flour, fried venison Tobias had smoked himself. He ate quietly, nodding once. "Good," he said. It was the first compliment she'd heard in months, maybe years. That afternoon, he saddled his horse. "Going into the valley, I'll bring supplies." Rosie's heart lurched. "Should I come?" Tobias studied her a moment. "No, the townsfolk would talk, and you don't need more cruelty." She looked down. "They already think I'm nothing." He paused before mounting. Then they're blind. When he returned that night, she had swept the cabin, mended a torn shirt, and baked what little bread she could. Tobias didn't comment, but his eyes softened as he stepped inside. "You don't owe me that," he said. Rosie smiled faintly. "I know, but I like taking care of things." Days turned to weeks. Snow began to fall again, blanketing the world in quiet. They spoke little, but the silence between them grew easier, companionable. She learned how to tend the fire, how to patch his gear, how to feed the mule that guarded the shed as fiercely as Tobias did his solitude. One evening, a storm rolled in fast from the north. The wind screamed through the pines, rattling the shutters. When the door creaked open, Tobias carried in an armful of firewood, hair plastered with snow. "The ridge'll be blocked by morning," he said. We'll stay inside a few days." He shook off the cold while Rosie ladled stew into bowls. They ate by the fire, the storm roaring outside like an angry god. She watched the flames flicker against his face, strong lines, the faint scar that caught the light. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked softly. "What?" "The world. People." He stared into the fire. "No. The world out there forgot what mercy means." "And you?" He looked at her then. "I forgot too. Until now." The room went quiet except for the wind and the pop of pine sap in the fire. Something unspoken passed between them, something fragile, unexpected. That night, when the storm howled hardest, Rosie woke to find the fire dying. She crept out of bed to feed it, but Tobias was already there, crouched before the hearth. He looked back over his shoulder. "You'll freeze if you're not careful." She smiled sleepily. "You worry too much." He shook his head. "Not enough." The next morning, the storm had buried the cabin up to its windows. Tobias handed her his coat while he dug a path to the shed. When she protested, he only said, "You'll need it more than I will." For the first time since her parents' deaths, Rosie felt something she hadn't dared to hope for: belonging. By the time the snow melted, she no longer thought of the cabin as his. It had become theirs. Spring came shyly to the mountains that year. The snow receded in silver ribbons down the slopes, and the pines exhaled their sharp green scent. The world thawed, and so, in quiet increments, did Rosie Turner. The cabin began to hum with small domestic rhythms. In the mornings, she rose early to grind coffee and stoke the hearth before Tobias came in from splitting wood. He would leave his gloves by the door, nod to her in thanks, and they would share breakfast in a peace neither of them had known in years. At first, she spoke little, but silence with Tobias wasn't punishment. It was safety. When he did speak, his words were measured, his tone steady as a mountain stream. He told her which berries not to eat, how to mend a trap line, how to tell when a storm was coming by the way the ravens circled low. And when she laughed, soft, surprised by her own voice, he would glance up from his work as if startled by music. One morning, she found him on the porch, sharpening his knife, his eyes distant. "How far is the next town?" she asked. 2 days' ride," he said. "Why?" "I was just thinking maybe one day I could go there, sell bread or sewing. I don't want to live off your kindness forever." He sheathed the knife slowly. "Rosie, this isn't kindness. It's respect. You've earned your place here." She blinked, not sure she believed him, but warmed by the words nonetheless. As spring deepened, so did their bond. Tobias built a small pen behind the cabin for chickens. Rosie planted herbs and carrots in the softening soil. She sang while she worked, quiet, breathy songs her mother once hummed, and Tobias would listen from the porch, pretending not to. But some nights, when the wind was low and the fire gentle, she caught glimpses of something heavier behind his stillness. His gaze lingered on the flames too long. His jaw tightened when thunder echoed across the valley. One evening, she found him outside after dark, sitting by the half-dug earth where he had been fixing the water trough. The moon cut his face into silver and shadow. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked. He didn't answer at first. Then quietly, "I still see them sometimes, the faces." She knew he meant the men he had hunted, the ghosts of his old life. He rubbed the scar under his eye. Killing changes a man, even when it's for justice. Rosie stepped closer. "So does mercy." He looked up and in the firelight of her lantern she saw something raw in his eyes. "Why do you talk to me like I deserve it?" "Because you do." Neither spoke for a long time. Then he reached out, slow, as if asking permission, and took her hand. His fingers were rough, hers trembling, but neither pulled away. From that night on, something shifted. He started joining her more, helping with the garden, sitting beside her as she mended clothes, telling stories of the frontier trails. They moved like two people learning the language of gentleness after too many years of silence. One morning, a deer wandered into the clearing, thin from winter, but unafraid. Tobias motioned for her to stay still. "If you move too quick," he murmured, "you'll scare it." Rosie smiled. "You could say the same about me." He looked at her then, really looked at her. "I'm trying not to." The moment hung, soft as sunlight through leaves. That evening she made stew with wild herbs and venison. Tobias tasted it, closed his eyes, and said, "That's the first thing I've eaten in 10 years that didn't taste like loneliness." Rosie laughed, but her eyes stung. She realized then that Tobias Kane, the man who had once lived as a shadow, was learning how to live again, and she was part of that reason. And perhaps, for the first time in her life, she was beginning to believe she was worth saving. By midsummer, the valley around Tobias's cabin had turned lush and green. Wildflowers brushed the knees of passing deer, and bees hummed lazily through the garden Rosie had planted with her own hands. The mountain had become a haven, a world apart, but peace on the frontier never lasted long. One afternoon, Tobias returned from a supply run earlier than expected. His horse was lathered, his jaw tight. Rosie met him at the gate, worry rising in her chest. "What happened?" He handed her a folded paper, creased, dirt-stained, the edges smudged with a familiar signature. "Cyrus Blackwell came looking for you," he said quietly. "He showed me this." Rosie unfolded it with trembling hands. It was the contract, the one Tobias had burned. Only now the ink looked fresh, the seal unbroken. "It's a copy," Tobias said. "Forged, maybe, but he's taken it to the sheriff. Claims you still owe him your parents' debt." Rosie's knees nearly gave out. "He can't do that. You saw me sign because I had to, but you burned it." "I did," Tobias said, "but men like Blackwell don't need truth. They only need proof that looks convincing." For the first time since she'd arrived, Rosie saw real anger in Tobias's face. Not the cold, restrained kind, but something deep, primal. "He's not coming for money, Rosie. He's coming for control." That night, the cabin felt smaller, the silence heavier. Rosie tried to read by the fire, but her eyes kept drifting toward Tobias. He sat sharpening his knife, expression unreadable. Finally she asked, "What will he do?" "Whatever the law lets him," Tobias said, "and when that fails, whatever it doesn't." The next morning they heard riders, 3 of them, kicking up dust along the trail. Cyrus led the way, wearing his best coat and a self-satisfied sneer. Beside him rode a lawyer from Cheyenne, tall, pale, his spectacles flashing in the sun. Behind them, a deputy trailed reluctantly, hand on his revolver. Cyrus dismounted first. "Afternoon, Kane. I'll make this quick. The girl still owes me $250, and unless you want me to take it in labor, you'll pay in cash." "She doesn't owe you a thing," Tobias said evenly. "Her family's debt died with them." The lawyer cleared his throat. "Actually, under territorial law." Tobias cut him off with a glare. "You think I care about your ink and paper? You come up this mountain to trade a woman's freedom for your greed again, and I'll bury that paper with you." The deputy shifted uncomfortably. "Let's keep this civil, Kane." Cyrus smirked. "Civil? I'm the injured party. She's the one hiding here like a thief." Rosie stepped forward before Tobias could stop her. Her voice trembled, but she didn't look away. "You think I'm afraid of you, Mr. Blackwell? I used to be, but not anymore. You can forge papers, twist laws, but you can't own me. Not ever again." Cyrus's eyes narrowed. "You ungrateful little—" He didn't finish. Tobias had drawn his revolver, not aiming, just holding it low, steady, a reminder of what kind of man he'd once been. "You have until I count 3, Tobias said quietly. "Then you ride." The deputy swallowed. "Let's go, Blackwell." Cyrus hesitated, fury boiling under his skin, then yanked his reins. "This isn't over, Kane. I'll see you both in court or in hell." As the riders disappeared into the trees, Rosie exhaled shakily. "He won't stop, will he?" Tobias holstered his gun. "No, but neither will I." That night, as thunder rolled across the ridge, Tobias sat by the window, eyes scanning the dark. Rosie came to stand beside him. "You've already done so much for me," she whispered. He looked at her, tired, fierce, and unyielding. "You're not a debt, Rosie. You're a promise I intend to keep." Lightning flashed, and for the first time she saw fear in his eyes, not for himself, but for her. The storm that had been brewing over the ridge finally broke 2 nights later. Wind howled through the trees, and thunder rolled down the valley like the growl of something ancient and furious. Tobias had been restless all evening, checking the rifle, securing the horses, banking the fire. Rosie could feel it too, that quiet sense that the mountain was holding its breath. Just after midnight, the dogs began to bark. Tobias was already on his feet. "Stay inside," he said. Rosie grabbed his arm. "It's him, isn't it?" He didn't answer, but when he looked at her, the truth was written in his eyes. He stepped outside into the rain, rifle raised, his figure a dark silhouette against the lightning-flashed sky. Down the slope, torches flickered. 5, maybe 6 riders. Cyrus Blackwell led them, his soaked coat plastered against his frame, his voice cutting through the rain. "Kane, the law's with me now. That girl belongs to me." Tobias shouted back, voice steady as stone. "There's no law that gives you the right to own another person, Cyrus. Turn back." Cyrus laughed, a bitter, sharp sound. "You think the law cares about your mountain sermons? You think your gun makes you righteous? I'll burn this place to the ground if that's what it takes." Lightning lit his face, eyes wild, teeth bared. He spurred his horse forward, shouting to his men, "Take her! Bring me the girl!" The gunfire came fast. Tobias fired first, one clean shot that shattered a man's torch and sent him tumbling from his horse. The rest scattered, chaos erupting in the storm. Rosie, watching from the doorway, could see nothing but flashes of light and the echo of thunder blending with gunfire. "Tobias!" she screamed. He moved through the dark like he'd been born to it, every motion precise, every shot deliberate. The rain fell in sheets, blurring everything into streaks of fire and shadow. Cyrus fired wildly, missing, cursing, slipping in the mud. When the last echo faded, only 2 men were still standing, Tobias and Cyrus. Cyrus aimed his revolver, hand shaking. "You think you can save her? You'll die like the rest of them." Rosie burst from the doorway before Tobias could stop her. "No," she cried, stepping between them. "Enough!" For a heartbeat, time froze, rain suspended mid-air, lightning illuminating her face. defiant and unbroken. Cyrus hesitated, thrown off balance by her courage. It was all Tobias needed. One motion, one final shot. Clean, controlled. The bullet struck Cyrus's gun hand, sending the weapon spinning into the mud. He howled, clutching his arm. Tobias strode forward, kicked the gun away, and stared down at him. "If you ever set foot on this mountain again, you won't walk away." The remaining men fled. Cyrus, pale with rage and pain, staggered after them, vanishing into the trees. When silence fell again, only the rain remained. Rosie stood, trembling. Tobias went to her, lowered his rifle, and cupped her face in his rough, shaking hands. "You shouldn't have come out," he whispered. She looked up through her tears. "I couldn't stay inside while you fought for me." He exhaled, his forehead resting against hers. "You're braver than any man I've ever known." In the distance, thunder rolled again, but this time it sounded like release. By morning, the storm had passed. Smoke rose from the chimney, and light spilled from the cabin windows, soft, warm, unafraid. When dawn came, the mountains glistened under a thin veil of mist. The world was washed clean. Every leaf, every stone, every memory of the night's violence softened by light. Rosie stood on the porch wrapped in Tobias's old coat, watching the fog curl around the pines. Somewhere below, the stream whispered like a lullaby. Behind her, Tobias stepped out, limping slightly from a graze on his arm. His rifle was gone, replaced by a steaming mug of coffee. He handed it to her wordlessly, the kind of gesture that said more than any vow could. "Are you hurt?" she asked. He shook his head. "Just tired." She looked up at him, the morning sun catching the scar on his cheek. "He won't come back, will he?" Tobias stared toward the trail that wound down the valley. "No, not after last night. Men like Cyrus know when the land itself has turned against them." They stood in silence for a while, listening to the birds return. Rosie leaned against the railing. "I never thought I'd belong anywhere again," she whispered. "After my parents died, it felt like the world had already decided who I was." Tobias turned to her, voice low. "The world doesn't decide. We do." She smiled faintly, eyes glistening. "Then I choose this, the cabin, the garden, you." He reached for her hand, rough fingers threading through hers. "It's your home now, Rosie, if you'll have it." She laughed softly, that bright, trembling laugh he'd come to live for. "I already do." Inside, the fire crackled. Outside, the mist lifted from the valley, revealing the wide green world below, not as something to fear, but as something they could finally call theirs. For the first time, Tobias Kane, the man who once hunted ghosts for a living, felt peace. And Rosie Turner, once a girl sold into silence, had found her voice again. When he drew her close, neither of them spoke. There was no need. The mountain had heard every promise. Every time I share a story like this, I'm reminded that love isn't born in comfort. It's born in courage. Tobias and Rosie didn't find each other through beauty or luck or wealth. They found each other because, when the world turned cruel, they both chose kindness instead of hate. Maybe that's the real redemption, not the debts we pay, but the hearts we free. Wherever you're listening from, the mountains, the city, or somewhere in between, I hope you carry a piece of their story with you. Do you still believe love like this exists? Tell me where you're watching from, because somewhere out there, another heart still needs to hear that it does.